By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how to make UX design and Scrum work together. I will go through all the available options and share what I'm currently using right now in the Scrum teams I support. Let's cut to the chase. The latest version of the Scrum Guide, the Scrum Guide 2020, doesn't mention UX. That says a lot about their approach for creating products and experiences. And it's hard, it's challenging for UX designers when you're not mentioned in this well-defined framework like Scrum. And there's consequences to that. Upper management, stakeholders, sponsors paying more attention to when a product will be released. The delivery date of a product and a good design is simply considered a nice to have. This is a common pain point in most of the Scrum teams I've supported throughout the years. I've seen that a lot. Competing objectives, aligning the design process with development cycles. UX designers, they want to go beyond the obvious solution. They want the company to have a competitive advantage through their products and services, but it takes time to do that, and sometimes this kind of work is hard to estimate, and the output of this kind of work requires sometimes even more research, user testing, instead of putting that in production like the engineers. The development team focused each sprint on delivery dates, focused on releases each and every single sprint. And usually the company, upper management, the sponsors, they are focused on timelines, on deadlines, on releasing code every single sprint, and they neglect innovation. So where does the UX work fit in Scrum? The Scrum framework, very detailed, structured. Where does UX work fit in? Well, you have quite a few options here. Option 1, simply add the UX task into the sprint backlog together with the development work. You estimate it, same as the development work. And because you're estimating it, you can track it. It's like a metrics, and you can improve on it. And the developers now see the UX work. From the whole process, specs, prototypes, you add it in the sprint backlog. The developers will see this kind of work. Collaboration will be easier with the designers because they speak the same language. But I don't like this option. You're adding complexity to a sprint in terms of tracking, in terms of estimating different functions you're trying to add in the same sprint. The scope of dev work and design work are very different. And remember the goal of a sprint. The goal of a sprint is to deliver a working increment of a product, of a service, something in production, something that the customer can use so that we can get feedback. That's the goal of a sprint. The whole team should be focusing on that, the development team. Now, if you start adding design work, we start talking about design work in the stand-up, in the other meetings. The focus is on two things now. So when the focus is on two things, you might miss the most important thing, that is releasing to production. And when you're doing two things at the same time, the design work and the actual development, same time in the same sprint, there's a problem because the design work sometimes goes on multiple sprints. It spreads across multiple sprints because it's quite complex. You need feedback from customers and all that when you do prototypes. Designers take a lot of time to build stuff because they want to be innovative. They want to go beyond the obvious solutions. Even though this option has tons of disadvantages, I don't like using it. We can still tweak a little bit this option. Instead of doing the design work and the development work in the same sprint, why not do the design work prior? Why not have a sprint ahead of actual development work? Always a sprint ahead. Here's how I typically do it with the Scrum teams I support. First, Scrum uses a few definitions to help support the Scrum process. First, the definition of ready, and second, the definition of done. Let's focus on the definition of ready. Quite simple. For a story, a task, a product backlog item to be picked up in the sprint, to be added to the sprint backlog, to be worked on by developers, the story needs to be, or the product backlog item needs to be ready. It needs to meet certain criteria defined by the team. Now, when the design work is done one sprint ahead, we can safely assume that this design work will be part of the definition of ready. It will be one of the requirements. Examples like designs need to be made based on the company's standards, the design standards, the company's policies. Designs need to be reviewed, designs need to be approved and finalized. All these things in the definition of ready. And the development team cannot pick a task, cannot pick a story as long as the definition of ready is not met for this particular story or particular task. You just added the design, the UX design process inside of Scrum. Now part of the requirement building, of a backlog refinement to get things ready. Simple tweak makes Scrum perfectly aligned with design. But there's still a problem. How do you track this design work? Should you even estimate it? Well, as per Scrum, you are already estimating it because you just put it inside the process, the Scrum process. The design work is part of a backlog refinement, backlog grooming. You don't need to estimate it with story points or another measure of work that you use. It's already catered for when you start the sprint. 10%, remember 10%, recommended 10% of the sprint goes into backlog refinement, backlog grooming activities for future sprints. That's exactly what we are trying to do. So no need to estimate it. But what about tracking? Tracking is also important. I've talked with multiple Scrum Masters, watched multiple Scrum teams work. It seems that they don't track this work. We track the development work, we measure it, we improve it, but the backlog refinement activities, the grooming, all the things that need to be done in order to get a story to ready, a task to ready, not tracked. How do you handle this issue? Well, there's quite a few options, and we won't have time to go through all these options. Let's talk about what I'm currently doing right now, what I'm currently experimenting with a team or support right now. The product section of a team, the product owner, the business analyst, the UX designer, all the people responsible to make stories, tasks ready. They also work in sprints. Same thing, the estimating story points or any measure of work that you're currently using. We have a velocity, we have a capacity. The only difference is that we have a separate board, a separate Kanban board with their own columns like research, prototypes, review, all the things required to make something ready for the development to pick. The developers have a separate board also, and as the design work or the backlog refinement work is done one sprint ahead, separate things running in parallel in a sprint, and we can track it because it's on a Kanban board. You get all the advantages of using a Kanban board. You can improve flow. The work is visible to developers. Collaboration is easier, but not only with developers, stakeholders, sponsors, upper management, other sections of a company. They are seeing the work and they can review the work. They can tell you when things are wrong. Marketing department, they can start building their stuff in marketing so that they can promote the product, the service. You can do capacity planning. You can do release planning because you're estimating work. Honestly, how many times have you started a sprint to work on a story, a feature, and then you realize that the design, the screens have not been finalized because you weren't one sprint ahead. The work wasn't tracked. No one knew that this thing wasn't finalized, and the development team is stuck, is blocked. There's an impediment. This can't happen if you're tracking the work, if you're always one sprint ahead. This can't happen. That's why you should be tracking the work. You should be improving this flow, same as you're doing for the development work. It's still work. You need to track it. You need to estimate it. And you need to try it with your team. Run an experiment with a team that you're currently supporting as a Scrum Master. If you're a Scrum Master watching, if you're a designer watching, tell your Scrum Master that they should be using that they should be suggesting that to the team. Which brings me to my next point. If you want more tips, insights on Agile Scrum personal growth, click on the video that stands out the most on the screen right now, and I'll see you in a few seconds.